Hello, and welcome back to episode 5 of Careers Unplugged, where we uncover the real stories behind professional life. I'm joined by one of my very good friends, Rebekah, an industrial placement student at Mott MacDonald, to discuss environmental consultancy and how students can gain relevant experience needed to enter this industry. Welcome to the podcast, Rebekah.
Hello, thank you for having me.
How did your geography degree best prepare you for work, and what advice do you have for students interested in going into this field?
I'm going to be completely honest. I tend to go more towards sort of human geography, whereas environmental consultancy is obviously a lot more physical geography. So, yeah, in all honesty, not like in terms of the content, not a lot really. I did a hydrology module in second year, I think, and that was probably the most useful module in terms of the work that I did at Mott MacDonald. Although also, I guess, a little bit of GIS, a little bit of sort of ecology, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think from a more sort of general perspective, just sort of going through reports and taking the information that you need from those reports and being able to collate it into a summary or, you know, that kind of thing. And just being confident in sort of writing styles and that sort of thing. So I'd probably say that that's sort of the way that my degree's best prepared me for that work.
Yeah.
I guess in terms of advice, placements are a really interesting opportunity where you can do stuff that's related to your degree, but you don't actually have to. So I know of people who have done one degree and then a placement in something completely different.
Yeah.
But if you are looking to do a placement that is, you know, somewhat relevant to your degree, you know, there's so many options out there, and I think you can run the risk of being too sort of looking too much in detail into what is available, and you can have too broad a view, but also too narrow a view. And I think it's just trying to find a balance of what's available versus what you're looking for. So it could just be that there's a couple of things that your degree has taught you that you're able to use, but it may not be everything that your degree's taught you. And so, yeah, just finding opportunities to kind of look at different industries and different types of work and that kind of thing, rather than specific to what you're being taught at uni. I think does that answer the question?
Yeah. I would definitely say it's kind of more about your interests and your overall ambitions for working in an industry.
Yeah.
Yes, you can gain certain transferable skills from the degree you're studying, but it's all about kind of like if you want a long-term career in the industry that you're going to, you know. Degrees can come secondary.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about sort of developing your knowledge, as you say, it's about developing your skills.
Yeah.
So GIS, I've done it since A-level pretty much. And so if that's something that you want to look more into, then it could be that you look into industries that are more specific to skill types rather than knowledge-based. Yeah.
Because I know, especially in the industry that I'm going to, like employers, less focused on the type of degree that you're studying, so they don't necessarily look at the fact you study econ, finance, business in my example. It's more about, do you actually have a passion for the industry that you're going to, or are you just applying willy-nilly?
Yes,
you know?
Yeah,
so how did you actually land your role at Mott MacDonald, which is I should mention, is a civil engineering company?
Yep.
And what's the application process like?
So Mott MacDonald was actually one of the last companies that I applied for the placement, and yeah, I think I saw it on something like Indeed or, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just you know, your generic job placement advertising sites.
Yeah.
And yeah, just had a look at kind of what they were offering. I didn't, you know, apply straight there and then. I looked at the website, I kind of looked at their values, what sort of work they did, where they were based, that sort of thing. And then applied. The application process was generally okay. I had to do like an online test, and then had an interview. But with Mott MacDonald, you're not just applying for like a specific role. You're also applying for an office. So I applied for, I think it was like just environment and social team based in Cardiff. But then I also applied for, I think it was more to do with water, in Southampton, I think it was.
Okay.
And then I only got confirmation of an interview for the Cardiff position, whereas I didn't actually hear anything back about the Southampton one. But that's okay. So they do the online test, and that's kind of I've forgotten the word for it.
Psychometric test?
Yes, that's the one. And then the interview was a little bit more knowledge based, and they were sort of asking questions about what is sustainability to you and that sort of thing. But something interesting that I actually found sort of during my placement was they're not just looking at your knowledge or your understanding, but they're also looking to see which candidates are best suited to working in a team and who they think are going to best gel with the rest of the team.
You've hit the nail on the coffin there.
But not just the team, but also the office and sort of the wider teams of the projects and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So they could have one candidate whose knowledge is sort of spot on and has the most incredible understanding, but is just they don't feel is the right fit for the team. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Do you know what? It's actually crazy you say that, because we were actually talking about that in one of our old episodes.
Oh yeah.
I think it was my Nomura interview, which is an investment bank, and genuinely one of the best advice the interviewer told me is literally, we're just looking for you to be a people person. If you can work well in a team, you've got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
they're not looking for like a PhD in your chosen industry. They just want to see if you're willing to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously a little bit of an understanding, a bit of knowledge is good, because you don't want to be going into an industry where you have absolutely no knowledge, and it would be sort of just really tough to learn everything from scratch. But as you say, a willingness to learn is so important, and that is what that I feel that is what Mott MacDonald were looking for. One thing about the application process. And I didn't really sort of understand this until I actually, joined Mott MacDonald. It took quite a long time for me to get answers for anything. And I actually only found out about my placement a month before starting, which was a bit stressful. But then I realised that they are just incredibly busy. And a lot of it is because certain work is very seasonal. And so they'll have times when they are absolutely swamped, and times when they're just kind of plain sailing. And I think that is just something to keep in mind when applying for placements, particularly that have sort of seasonal work and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So kind of with all that last minute planning, how did you manage to get an accommodation in Cardiff so quickly?
Yeah. It was an absolute blessing, actually. The first month I was able to get a place to stay with a couple who knew a friend of my parents from Egypt, who just happened to be living in Cardiff, and they knew her, or the couple I stayed with, they knew the other friend from her church. So that was, absolute blessing. I was able to stay with them for a month, and then during that month I was surfing the web like no tomorrow to try and find a place. And again, another blessing. I managed to find a house share with 3 other professionals, actually. But all really lovely. And it was like a 10-minute bus ride into the city centre, and then like another 10-minute walk to the office. So it was a little bit stressful because I only really managed to secure the house in like the last week of that first month. So a little bit stressful, and I'm kind of, trying to settle into a new way of working, a new style of life, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it all sorted out, which was quite amazing, to be honest. Yeah.
All glory to God.
Indeed. Amen.
So let's go back to your role. So what did a typical day-to-day life look for you?
So Monday, I'd tend to get into the office about 8:30. Just have a bit of half an hour to kind of set up, get a cup of tea, get myself sorted, and then we'd start the day with a team meeting, which was really good. And that would be not just with the line managers and the rest of the team, but also like the main team leader. And it would be just going through the week just gone, the work we'd managed to get done, the stuff we still needed to do, and then the week ahead, whether some of us had a conference or, that sort of thing. But it was also an opportunity to just say, I'm a little bit light for work this week. So if anyone needs any help, just let me know, and I'm happy to offer my services.
Yeah.
And then I'd also have a meeting with my line manager once a week. That was normally, I think, on a Tuesday or something, but it depended when either of us were free.
Yeah,
and that
same
was,
with me.
Yeah, that was very much kind of a bit more of a sort of one-on-one catch up, which was good and really helpful. One thing I found with the team I was part of, they were just super, super supportive, and you could tell they cared about the team and the the work that we were doing, but also just like how we were doing, our welfare, our health, that sort of thing. So really, really helpful. But then until about, I don't know, maybe 12, when I'd stop for a lunch break, it would be sort of sorting out emails, stuff that had come in over the weekend, or maybe after I'd sort of logged off on Friday. And then I'd just be getting on with various bits of work, whatever sort of project I'd be doing that week. At times it was multiple projects, or I'd, have various meetings, those sorts of things. And like day to day, it wasn't the same. I could be doing one project a week, but the sort of the setup of the day would be different every day, so I wouldn't have like blocks of time that were the same each week. And there would be some meetings that were the same each week, but just because that's when people could do, and they were weekly catch-ups on projects and stuff. While the project work didn't really change, what I was doing at certain times often did, which I guess was quite cool, and it meant that there was a flexibility in terms of what I was doing. And I had a bit of a choice on what work I could get on with at what time, and that sort of thing, which I generally just find really helpful.
Yeah. So what kind of projects did you work on?
The main project I worked on was to do with rail infrastructure, but I also worked on marine ecology, a project to do with marine ecology, and then also actually another rail infrastructure project, but a bit more local. And that entailed loads of different things like environmental impact assessments, or desk studies, which are essentially just doing a load of research on in office. But then I'd also do site visits, so site walkovers, or one of the site visits I did was placing reptile mats, instead of in like strategic positions, so that the reptiles could come out and sun themselves on the mats, and then a couple of weeks later the ecologists would go out and sort of collect the data and the mats in again. But yeah, I think those were like the main three things. But I also did little things like helping others with formatting of sort of documents and that kind of thing, or sort of taking photos out on site. Or I think there was one week where I was actually going through some old records trying to find some information for someone who'd lost it. It's like, I'm pretty sure it's in one of these like 9 boxes. And that was quite fun, actually. That was a bit different. But yeah, the main project I worked on was sort of rail infrastructure and more to do with the water that, inevitably it's going to rain. And
as it does in the UK.
Well, exactly. And looking at where the water's going, how much is coming from the infrastructure, where it's going, whether it's potentially contaminated, those sorts of things. Yeah.
Excellent stuff. So what would you say some of the biggest kind of environmental challenges you faced on your work experience?
Well, in terms of sort of site visits, a big thing that we have to be really careful about is sort of invasive species, mostly plant. But the problem with invasive plant species is it's really easy for the seeds to get stuck on like your clothes or under your shoes, and then you go walking around the site and you, without realizing, you're spreading these species. And obviously they're invasive, they're not native to that area, but they also spread incredibly quickly. And so we have to just be really careful to monitor, to identify where these species are present, and to monitor whether they're spreading or not. Obviously, animals also spread seeds, so there's very little we can do to completely stop them spreading. Just making sure that we're not going into the areas where there's lots of invasive species to try and minimize the risk of spreading the seeds. So that was one big thing with the ecology work. In terms of rail infrastructure, one of the main, as I've kind of mentioned, obviously to do with water, the reason that sort of the regulations are so strict around water is it is very dependent on the location, very dependent on the type of infrastructure, the type of soil. So, you could be looking to discharge sort of rainwater from, say, an overbridge. And the land around this bridge is or has been historically contaminated. The last thing you want to do is let the water run over this ground because it's going to pick up the contaminants. And then especially if you're looking to discharge it to groundwater, that's a big no-go zone. There's there's sort of stricter regulations if you're discharging to groundwater, because obviously that's harder to manage if it gets contaminated, as opposed to like a river or just like a field. And so it's just kind of adhering to all these sort of environmental regulations by the Environment Agency and in this case local flood authorities, and making sure that the drainage designs that have been submitted by the design teams are compliant with, for example, culvert size or sort of pipe size, so that they're not causing more problems than are necessary. But it's also making sure that we're not significantly increasing the amount of water that is going into sort of rivers and stuff, and therefore increasing the risk of flooding. And that kind of thing. So it's just those sorts of stuff, really. And then with the more local rail infrastructure project, we did a walkover where we were just taking pictures of various different things, making sure that the route that we wanted to take, we could actually take, and looking at sort of changes in sort of land level and topography where we'd need to fill areas in or, cut areas back. But there was one area where actually the ground itself was potentially contaminated because in the past people had just built up the land by kind of throwing like rubbish on. And this was like, I don't know, more than 50 years ago or something. So the regulations back then were nothing like they are today.
Yeah. We've made some progress in that department.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so we kind of needed to identify that and see what the situation was. Obviously, there was only so much we could do by just doing a walkover. But I think it was kind of just helpful to see where that area was, potentially how big it is, how significant an impact it could have on the route. And in this case, we needed the ground to be completely flat. And so, identifying whether we'd need to kind of cut into the land a bit, which would obviously release contaminants, which is not good. So just things like that, really. But it is very sort of location and project specific.
It seems like there's a lot of analytical thinking that comes with your role.
Yeah, as I say, it's just understanding the context and not cutting corners, because you could end up just making more problems for yourself in the future than trying to solve. Yeah.
Yeah, and not only does that kind of impact the environment, it also impacts the company as well.
Oh, yeah, no, completely. Yeah.
So you just got to be careful, don't you?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. Can you walk us through what an environmental impact assessment typically involves?
Yeah. So environmental impact assessments they're actually quite broad. It's looking at, as the name sort of suggests, it's looking at the effect that a project or sort of the infrastructure that we're building or taking away, it's looking at the impact that will have on the local environment. So it could be that, well, actually, it's not just the environment, because we also look at listed buildings, and we look at, is it going to increase sort of noise and light pollution? Is it going to disturb people in local houses? Is it going to have an impact on local businesses, good or bad? And if so, how much do we... it's more kind of an estimate, but how much of an impact do we think they're going to have?
Yeah.
And then also it's looking at sort of protected trees. Again, looking at invasive species. Are there any present that could be, there's a risk that we could spread them and endanger sort of more local species. Trying to think what else there is. To do, again, with water. Are there any sort of significant water bodies nearby? Historical flooding. Have there been floods in the past in this area? And if so, what is the likelihood that we're potentially making it worse? Especially if we're laying down things like tarmac and that kind of stuff, where the water will just run over the surface rather than going into the ground. Is there existing infrastructure? Are there other projects going on at the same time? What's the impact on traffic? So are we going to have to close roads or like roundabouts and that sort of thing? And what impact is that going to have on people trying to commute to work? Just things like that, really. It's looking at a sort of overall assessment. Oh, also air quality. Are we impacting the air quality? Are there potential for fumes or like hazardous chemicals, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
It's just trying to get a bit more of an understanding of the local environment, the local context, the impact that we could be having on all of this, and trying to minimise those impacts as best as possible. And it's also I guess it's another step in identifying whether we can actually do this project, or if there are too many factors at play that it's just going to either be incredibly difficult or it's just not going to be cost effective, or we're just going to have to go through so many more barriers with the Environment Agency or local authorities and that sort of thing.
Can I ask as well, did you have to do any pre-reading before you did your industrial placement, or is it literally you just had an open mind going in?
I'd done things like environmental impact assessments a little bit before. So I actually did a little bit of one at geography A level when we were looking at sort of rural and urban areas. But it is very much you're learning on the job. and therefore you do have to kind of keep an open mind and be willing to learn, because you're going to be in a room with people who know a lot more than you, and yet you're also expected to kind of meet their level at some point. So like, if you want to be more prepared, then sure, go ahead and do some reading about the kind of projects that they do, the kind of things that you might get involved with, the sorts of things that will be involved with that, like environmental impact assessments. And actually with the EIA's environmental impact assessments, you can actually go and do them yourself. You can go out to your local area and, I don't know, find a checklist somewhere of the sorts of things that you consider, and then just go out and sort of observe your local area and just see the types of things like, I don't know, is there significantly more sort of noise pollution in one area compared to another? Or like, are there areas where there's sort of more rubbish out just on the road, like sort of litter, compared to another area? Like, are sort of areas cleaner in some places, sort of air-wise, but also noise, light, litter, those sorts of things. There's, when you do it yourself, it's going to be very kind of simplified, but it's just kind of getting to grips with the environment and the context and understanding what's going on around, because you can't just go in with a project and say, right, we're going to plonk this here, and the people around you are going to be happy with it. It's not as simple as that, and you have so many things that you need to consider, which does create a lot of barriers and does make things a lot harder to get through. But in the context of the UK, we're a small island, and
we definitely are.
we don't have actually that much space to be able to do stuff, and so the space that we do have, we have to really consider what we're doing. You can't just go into a protected area and just say, oh, we're going to build like a train track there, because that's been set apart for scientific research, or that kind of thing. So you just have to be really, really careful, because there's so many things that you have to consider.
Yeah. That's you make some good points there. So on to our next question. What kind of like software or like methodologies did you use on your role?
Big one, obviously we use Teams. That was interesting to get to grips with. I was a bit more used to Zoom, over lockdown. That was what we used, yeah. Well, and also my school used Google, so I had no clue what I was doing with Teams. Actually, no, I did a little bit because we used it at uni.
Did you have to have your camera on?
Oh yes, yeah. No, camera's on. Most of the time it was more just. We didn't in the sort of like the big meetings that we had with other companies. It was more kind of you could choose. But if it was team meetings, then yes, your camera on. Just make sure that you're aware and you're engaging, which is fair enough.
Body language is so important.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Making sure that you're not actually sleeping. And then just other sort of Microsoft software, mostly sort of Excel and Word, but I also use PowerPoint quite a lot. There was one time towards the end of my placement where I had to create a presentation, but then I was also updating it almost daily. And then the company that wanted the presentation kept changing what they wanted, or the information that they wanted. So I ended up making about 5 different presentations, which was a little bit annoying, but I definitely feel like I got to grips with the software a bit more. It's more Word and more sort of Excel, and it isn't just general Word. Like, there is both project but also company specific formatting, so it was getting to grips with that as well. And then using various sort of GIS software, so ArcGIS Pro, which is the software that I tend to use still, at A level, but also during my degree, we used a little bit of that. Used lots of Google Maps actually, and then sort of also like data sites and stuff for like data maps. So like Environment Agency sort of flood maps and that sort of thing. On the ecology surveys that I did, putting out the reptile mats, we used I think it was like an app type thing. But basically it was just to pinpoint where we were putting the mats so that we could go, so that the ecology team could basically just go out 2 weeks later, say there's a mat here, look, there it is, we'll pick it up. And so it's to make sure that we're getting a good coverage, because then you could kind of just zoom out of the map, see where sort of you'd put the mats, whether there are areas that, were a little less covered, and then you could just go and, put a mat there. Try and get good coverage, good distribution. But then, you could go and then collect them back in again. And then if when we were out there, we did see like a slow worm or, that kind of thing, we could log that as well. And then also logging like invasive species and where they were present and that sort of thing. So in the field, we just used the app, and then it would update to like a larger map that we'd go back to the office and then just process the data from there on this sort of large collated map. Yeah. But I don't know if that was Esri software, which is ArcGIS Pro is also Esri, or if it was something else. But it was something along the lines of that.
I feel I'm being very educated right now on the different software geography students use.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm rambling a little bit.
For us LUM students, it's literally Word, PowerPoint, Excel, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you learn something new every day, right?
Well, exactly.
Yeah. So just one more question.
Yep.
Where do you see the future of environmental consultancy heading, especially with growing climate concerns?
Oh, boy. What a question.
And biodiversity as well.
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously climate change is just like not just a huge local or national issue, it's a huge global issue.
Absolutely.
I can't really say much about a global perspective because each country has their own different standards and regulations. One country will be a bit stricter than another. But I guess in terms of the UK, I can only really see regulations getting harder and more strict. Just as we, lose more land to more projects, and we, start looking to protect more areas. And I guess there's an element of, potentially the public getting involved as well as the public becomes more aware of endangered species or protected areas or the impacts that various different bits of infrastructure could have. There's an element that, there'll be stricter or harsh... no, that's not the right word. I guess more lobbying from the public for stricter regulations. There is also going to be the opposite, because there will be people who are frustrated that, the government's promised these projects or this company's promised this project and they're not going to be able to deliver as they said they were because of these sort of tightening regulations. And I guess we've just been seeing this for years now. You get both sides. I think environmental consultancy will always be important because you can't just get rid of it. There are regulations that you do need to adhere to because otherwise we would just be a barren wasteland. We wouldn't have any green spaces. We wouldn't have we don't really have clean water at the moment, unfortunately, but it would be in a much worse situation. The regulations, are what are protecting not just biodiversity or the local landscapes, but actually protecting humans as well. And I think it's also really, really important to remember that we are living in this environment. We're not separated from it. And so the impact that we have on it doesn't just impact the nature and the environment and, the water. It impacts us as well. And I think with climate change, there will be a growing awareness of, or there has been a growing awareness of the impact that we are having on the environment, but also the impact that is having back on us. And that, it's not an isolated issue. It's interconnected and will continue to be so. And will get worse and worse and worse. We're seeing sort of crazy storms and, which...
It's not something to kid about.
Oh, no, completely. One of the worst storms that we had recently, my village back home, it's got like 3 entrances and all 3 of them were completely cut off by flooding for at least a day, which obviously impacts the people who are trying to get into the village, for the school, for the pub, for other services. We have a farm in the village as well, but also like it impacts people trying to get out for work. And then we've also got, I think we've got a housing estate company wanting to build more houses. And it's finding a balance between all of these different problems, because yes, we need more housing, but actually we need to be really careful where we're putting it, because we do not want to be increasing the risk of flooding, for example. But yeah, I think climate change will continue to be a problem, and therefore regulations are going to continue to grow and become stricter, just out of necessity. I think until we realise quite how big the impact we are having on the environment and how much it impacts us as well.
And do you think, say, the UK government has a big role to play in like mitigating environmental concerns? No, definitely. I mean, you've got bodies such as like the Environment Agency, and you've got local authorities, like local flood authorities, that are sort of doing the management and running the operations behind, sort of on a more local level. But you can't just do it on a local level. You need the backing on a more national level. And the problem is there are just so many problems that the government are having to consider. And it's weighing up what is more of a priority, or whether, I don't know, maybe what needs to be delegated better. And I don't know whether that means creating another sort of environmental regulation body or something to oversee all of the organisations that are involved. Just to kind of make sure that that's all running smoothly. But yeah, ultimately, I think it does come down to the government and, and their priorities. But obviously, it's not an easy solution. And, there are just so many problems. And there always will be, unfortunately. Just that's the nature of the world. Yeah, but I do think kind of creating a bigger awareness of kind of like these issues at hand could potentially solve like bigger, like, I don't know, climate change concerns later.
Well, the thing with creating more awareness is, yes, it is good, but the way you do it is more important, because
it's about taking action.
Well, the thing is, there's something called greenwashing.
Yeah.
You say you're doing something. So, for example, say you're a paper company and you're going around cutting down trees, but then you say, oh, we'll plant this many more trees for however many trees we cut down. But the problem is trees take a long time to grow and a long time to mature. And also, if you're planting one species of tree, you've created a monoculture and you've decreased the gene pool, and the likelihood of those trees surviving decreases rapidly. So creating awareness is good, yes. And unfortunately...
But is it enough?
Well, in this day and age, you kind of have to feed things in bite-sized portions, because sometimes that's all people have time or capacity to take in. But there's only so much you can pack into those bite-sized bits of information. And so awareness creating tends to be very simplified, very kind of, this is a problem, this is what you can do about it. But, you know, the likelihood of people taking that in is, you know, that's up to them, really.
Yeah. But we can always hope for a better future.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it is definitely important to create awareness, because otherwise how are people going to know? But you do have to take action, whether this is through workshops or working with communities or going into schools and doing sort of activities with kids.
Yeah.
But you do have to up the level of information that you're putting out there, because it's not just a simple sort of level-headed process, or, you know, like the information isn't simple. And also, you can't just create awareness about one problem and forget all the others. You have to create awareness of the interconnectedness of all of these problems, because it is really easy to miss out on that. And then you get people going, oh, but this is a problem. But then other people are like, this is a problem. And then it's very much like it's competition at that point.
Yeah.
When it's not competition, because all of these things are, you know, while they might be different things, they all serve to exacerbate each other and make things even worse for certain people and that kind of thing. So just creating awareness of interconnectedness of problems, things like wicked problems, I'm sure you may have heard of before, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, wonderful. Becca, it's been an absolute joy having you in the studio today.
Thank you. I hope I haven't rambled on for too long.
Do you know what I always say to our guests? Like, I would rather you kind of waffle on and give as much detail as possible than give like one sentence. You know, it's more rather than less.
Yep.
You know, but thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I always love talking to you. I should also mention Rebekah used to be my second year housemate. So I'm very glad that you've come on the podcast.
Yeah, it's exciting.
And you know, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate this as well. But from now on, please stay tuned for more episodes where we will provide valuable insights into the crazy world of work, guiding you through internships and graduate schemes. Right. Now, in our 6th episode, I'll be chatting to a student who wanted to become an investment banker despite studying a biomedical degree. So that should be quite fun. But from Barrag FM to you, we wish you a great week. Goodbye.